What's up, guys? Benjamin Reed here with the Next Gen Sales Leaders Podcast. I'm here with Scott Martinez, and he is the CEO and founder of B2B Catalyst, a GTM, a revenue engine that works. Welcome to the show, Scott.
Thanks, man. Really excited to chat. I've enjoyed our little bit of our conversations on LinkedIn and looking forward to our chat today. It should be fun.
So I want to give everyone like a real hook into the rest of the conversation. I'd love to know if nobody listens to the rest of this podcast, what's the number one thing you think people should be paying attention to in the GTM world, startup world, or anything that you think is most pressing?
I've been thinking a lot about this. I think the reality is that we're especially those of us in the SaaS world, we're in a world of tool overload. And I think the problem that we're facing, there's two problems. One is the way a lot of tools work is the more people that use a tool or playbook, the less it becomes. And two, it's really, really hard to identify how do I actually, okay, this is a better hook. I think that the way that tools are built, brought to market, and implemented is fundamentally broken. And it's let me give you an example. We were doing a list build for someone as a service. We did a clay list build, and we found out that the process was siloed enough that the sales rep had what the campaign manager built and then the sales rep got was so siloed and disconnected that no one's needs are taken into account. The sales rep assumed some things were true about some of the accounts, like their technographic, which he turned out actually to be wrong about. And there was so much misalignment around that process that it just didn't work. And really only the sharpest operators are actually able to get technology working, not because they have to get more shit done. It's that the alignment and change management piece and the discovery of what is the actual root cause of the bottleneck in your funnel is just really freaking confusing. So what that leads to is everyone is talking about everyone is preaching, 10-year-old sales fundamentals or really complex workflows with like 15 different tools in their stack. And the reality is most of the time, you don't need 10 different tools. Like you do need there's a core of 5 or 6 that you absolutely do need if you don't have, and I've seen orgs where that isn't the case. One of the orgs we're working with, it's like none of the AEs have sales loft and they want the AEs to self-source. So now none of us trust the data. And, they're like, hey, you need sales loft. Go you have sales loft already, get the AE's licenses. If you don't have it, it's down. But I think the broader problem with people is you shouldn't be focusing on implementing technology. You should be focusing on you need to be focusing on what is the actual bottleneck of our funnel? And then you reverse engineer an entire, we like to think in terms of plays and not projects. And what I mean by that is you want to ship something, a cohesive package of process and tool and people execution that results in a revenue impact. And I think that's just a much more productive way to do stuff rather than buy a tool, get an annual contract. Because the way a lot of people are selling right now is buy my tool. It's cool. And hopefully you'll get enough ROI that you won't cancel and pay me up front. So you're kind of forced and locked in doing this. And I get, that worked for a while where, one, software implementation was long and a pain in the ass. 2, tools are really just essentially task workspaces. A lot of them are glorified task workspaces of getting people to do things. And that ties into a data warehouse on the back end that provides reporting, right? That was what tools were. And so that kind of made sense of force everyone to use the tool and you'll get some value out of it. But the problem is that's not what a lot of software is. You're trying to get a business outcome from it. That's why people buy stuff. And that's just kind of fundamentally misaligned with, especially how you need to adopt GTM. A good example, if you don't have very much qualified web traffic, you should not, you might want to get RB2B, but you should not spend an enormous amount of time implementing some website intent or website chat. You're going to get freaking nothing out of that. That's not a high leverage play for you, right? If you have a small TAM, you should not be spending your time fucking around with smart link. because that's not going to deliver any value. Like that play has no legs because you need a much higher conversion rate than Smartly can possibly deliver. So that's, I think, the big thing is like, you have to think what you should be focused on. It's kind of like first boss. One of my first bosses drilled in the idea. It was like, it's a process, it's not the tool. The tool just accelerates the process. I think that's the thing that people are fundamentally missing, is just you're focused on the wrong things. And like, and that's what we should do at Set. The way I like to think about this, so like, how do you do this, is I like to think in terms of outbound and inbound funnels. And fundamentally, the way I break this down is you have accounts, you have contacts, you have conversations, talking to those qualified contacts. The conversations, some of them turn into meetings, some of the meetings turn into opportunities, some of the opportunities turn to companies. That's outbound. On the inbound side, you have website visitors. Some set of that is qualified. Some subset of that opts in. From those opt-ins, and there's high intent, low intent. Some set of those buckets, you're able to get conversations from call and email. And some set of those conversations turn to meeting ops, et cetera, down the phone. And I think the thing is, like, they're pretty well established benchmarks. And you know what's not in that? Dials are not in that. Emails are not in that. LinkedIn connects. Activity doesn't matter. Like, funny story, like Aaron Ross, the godfather of the predictable revenue model, he never tracked dials. Never did. All he tracked was quality conversations. And the reason why is you don't get any value from emails or dials. And it's very easy to ramp up your dials and not see an increase in conversations that are used.
Mhm.
So I think for me, the way I like to look at things is you look at that funnel, you track those metrics over time, and we know our benchmarks, right? So like if your contact to conversation is below 15 or 20%, it's like, okay, you either have a deliverability problem, or you have a data problem, or you have an execution problem. And so it's like, and then if your conversation to meeting rate is below 10%, you either have a messaging problem, a targeting problem, or a rep follow-up problem.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so it's those kinds of things where that's to me the way you actually create revenue impact. And really, I view this as a combination of agile and lean, which are more prevalent in project management and manufacturing circles. But that's kind of how I look at this, is like everyone's trying to implement tools backwards. Like if you have no website traffic, you're not, a lot of inbound plays are basic, or like website intent plays. You're really just trying to increase your website visitor to conversation or website visitor to meeting rate. That's it. Right. And in a way, it almost exists because your website experience might be bad. Now, not always. Sometimes people need additional meetings to respond. But that's the way I think about it. It's like, okay, so if you don't have enough qualified website visitors, there's no point indexing. There's only so much you can index on that play. The thing is, every conversion rate kind of has a practical limit you can go. Like it's very, very hard to break a per email reply rate of 3 or 4%. Damn near impossible. Like the only way I've seen 4 or 5% is like hyper warm leads. And I interviewed teams at Lavender and User Notes to figure this out. And like the findings were pretty consistent. Like multi-channel, brand aware, ABM present ads, you can hit 3% per email. So like, that's like, say 15% for like a 5 email sequence. You can hit that. That's doable. But most of the time, but there's no way you're magically going to get to like 50%, right? And so if your email reply rate per email is like 2% and your sequence reply rate is like 10%, it's like, all right, that's not your bottleneck. Or it's like another example. It's like, hey, I want to get better signals and intent data. Well, what's your sales cycle? 90 days. What's your ACV? There's a real example. 100K. Why the fuck do you need signals? You don't need to cut your sales cycle. That's fine. That's a great sales cycle to ACV to deal size ratio. It's like the problem is it's taking your reps like 4 hours of prospecting to generate 1 or 2 conversations. They're having to manually research all the that's the way I kind of approach this, is like, okay, where's the bottleneck in this process? And then you deploy tech based on that.
Yeah. So I think that it's one of those things where there's like different levels of experience that people have. And obviously you or we've been through the gamut across many different companies, and we've kind of seen the edges of what works and what doesn't
True.
work. And most people, to your point, who are coming into this, maybe they're just like a marketing director, or they're, the VP of sales, or maybe they're just a founder, right? And they're just like, I got this product, I got to go to market. Oh my God, cool email. It's so hot.
Exciting.
Look at this clay thing that's happening. They're building lists, and they're doing this Trigify like signal lookup thing, and
Yeah.
it all seems so easy. It's like this easy button I can push. Let me go buy this. And the thing to your point, that they don't realize is that each one of those tools only works in certain context.
Right. Well, like the dirty secret
And
is most cold email agencies fail. Most cold email agencies fail 70 to 90% of their clients. Like 70 to 90% of those engagement fails. Half of those failures are not the cold email agency's fault, but there's no way they can address them with their existing business model. And the average contact for meeting rate for most of those companies is like 1 to 0.5%. Like you give them 1,000 contacts, you're going to get like 1 to 5 meetings. A great outcome would be 10 meetings for 1,000 contacts. That's a sustainable SDR motion. And that's frankly complete suicide if you're running an account basement.
well, that's where, like, you had actually, I was going to bring this up. You had an interesting post. I think it was actually your number one pinned post, where you said, if you're a founder or revenue leader with 10 to 100 customers and 20K plus price point, bad news. You have way fewer great prospects than you think. And then you go on to explain the math behind it. And I think one of the things that it's the most obvious thing to somebody that is experienced, and it's the least obvious thing to somebody to someone that's not experienced. And that is TAM analysis. And I think that people don't get, because the conversion rates on emails, to your point, are poor. I mean, it's 3% reply rate, 5% interested reply rate, maybe 30 to 40% meeting book rate, 70% of those show. By the time you get to an actual qualified conversation, you've just run through 10 to 20,000 people.
Yeah, totally.
And people don't get that, like, if the TAM is, 20,000 people, well, you just blasted the entire TAM and you're done.
Exactly.
So
and there's a carrying capacity
why,
of how many times you can email those people over what time frame. There's like conversation saturation rate.
Exactly. Yeah. And so for us, at Next Gen Sales Systems and Leaders, we we'll do at most every 60 days, but that's wild. That's like in a fast growing, high turnover type TAM. But like if it's a tiny TAM, I mean, once every 3 to 4 months, maybe on the cold side. And so there really becomes like TAM management is a fundamental constraint. And so that's where it's like people come to me with these tiny micro TAMs in these 20K price point. And they think that cold email is going to solve their problems. And I have to say to them, look, we can't work with you because it's not our problem. It's actually just a constraint in reality that you don't realize. So I guess with that being said, clearly to overcome that, there has to be some level of understanding of certain strategies and motions are good for certain scenarios. But aside from actually just...
I want to take this in a different direction.
Sure, go for
most people... I had this conversation. I actually had this conversation today, and this is to me more what the heart of go-to-market engineering is. We had this company that came to us. They're selling to they're selling in a regulated industry, and they were selling. There's a whole life cycle of people who need this form of financial regulation, and they were selling to one person. And the agents who you were talking with was like, oh, we're going to go after this type of management company, and we think there's 7,000. We ran it through Clay. It was like, sorry guys, you have 400.
Right.
And like when that happened, it was like, well, fuck. I mean, granted, there's 60 million in opportunity in those 400, but the 400 and like a high volume follower from like you need such an unbelievably different motion to not burn that market as. Exactly. Now, this is where we re-engineered it. I spent a long time talking to the founder today, and I was like, wait, you're telling me you can actually sell to half of the banks and credit unions in the United States? Oh, so the thing that people don't understand is the difference between TAM and SAM and actually what you're buying. And as a general rule in SaaS, people think you're targeting industries. You're not targeting industries. You are targeting businesses with a set of workflows that you can augment or streamline. So for us, I approach this analysis very differently. We're working with a client. I'm talking to a client tomorrow that does device management. And the way we're constructing their TAM analysis is I'm basically saying, okay, the TAM for you guys is actually not industry based. How many companies with 20 to 200 I mean, technically it's companies that have Google Workspace and Microsoft 365 from like 10 to however many things. And really what we're looking at is actually the SAM, and the way how I would define the SAM is the set of companies that you have a whole product solution for. And this is not well understood. What I mean by whole product solution is you have a combination of features today and implementation services on your side or on the client side, and users like power users that can support this, which collectively together result in sufficient business ROI that they will retain and upsell in the next year. In my view, this is the number one reason that 6sense faced so many churn headwinds and why they pissed so many people off. 6sense outsold their serviceable addressable market. And the reason I think that was the case was, number one, they didn't have as good intent data as they thought they did. Number two, they sold the companies with bad marketing and rev ops functions. Number three, they sold the companies with weak BDR functions. If you don't have a strong BDR function, then, you get a lot less value from intent data. And number four, they also sold the companies with too weak of a demand generation function. So what happened is, like, if you think about what bid stream intent basically is, what you're basically figuring out is which companies are Googling. Now, if you read their book, the whole point of the dark funnel is you're supposed to use intent data as attribution for brand marketing. Basically, like, I don't fucking know why people are doing this. If you're using intent data to capture your own demand, that's great. How intent data gets used in practice is you're figuring out which companies are engaging with other people's brand marketing. That's considerably less effective. The thing though is, I think 6sense got high on their own supply, and they way outsold the set of companies with those set of conditions necessary to succeed on their product. And now they're having to do CMO conferences and 2-3 year deals to prevent the company from falling off a cliff while they desperately try to get the product fixed. So like
that's really interesting that you say that, because I feel like for anybody who's listening, 6sense was the darling of intent-based signals before it was cool.
Yes.
So like now everybody and their brother, like Trigify and, everyone else who does any type of intent-based signals. And this is back in like the big box world of Apollo and Zoom. And then you have like 6sense, and they're charging $100,000 per annual contract at the minimum. And it's kind of like everybody wanted the dream of this perfect intent knowledge that allowed us to reach out at the perfect time in an account-based marketing approach. But to your point, is the dream and the demand was there, but the actual reality of the dream outcome was kind of built upon false promises because the product wasn't as good as it actually seemed, or as it was promised. And so to your point, that's partially not like 6sense's fault. It's the fault in the sense that like the product's not great, but it's also not their fault in the sense that like there are so many dimensions to your point, to success.
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, I can't solve a bad offer. I can't solve a shitty price point. I can't solve a small TAM. I can't solve that 80% of your market is on Microsoft accounts and I can't email to them.
Right.
Like I can't solve that stuff.
Yeah.
But I think like in sales in general, the only way I've been able to like kind of maneuver around these realities is at the sales level, is to literally just say, here's where you're going to fail. Do. I am one piece of this puzzle. I am not God. I'm not going to support you in like every way you want. I'm not going to raise your children for you. I can do this one thing. If you don't have these 5 other things in place, you will probably fail. I will still sell you this to you, but do not come to me in 5 months and complain, because I'm telling you right now that you need those things. So if you feel comfortable with that, let's go. And I think what, to your point, 6sense did is that they didn't have that conversation. They probably oversold the capabilities without any type of care for setting up those edges. And here we are, and it's not shocking what's happening.
Well, here's my point of view. This is why I'm such a big believer in target account lists. Is like, here's the scary part. So get Rev AI, get some studies on this. With they backed into it this different way with a concept called exit graph. Here's the problem. It's not even just that you could theoretically sell them. It's if you sell the companies without this complete set of attributes, basically saying, hey, I actually can solve your whole problem, the close rate drops 50 to 80%. So if you don't have one of these target account lists, here's what you're doing. You're basically you're saying is your sales effectiveness and your marketing effectiveness outside of that target account list is completely lit on fire. So to me, it's like, it's actually almost lethal, where it's like, if you aren't honest with yourself about what your serviceable addressable market is today, this is probably, in my view, this is why a lot of reps misquote it, is they get handed target accounts where some of that target account list just sucks. And RevOps doesn't know enough about sales or go-to-market engineering to know, I actually handed them a shitty account list and I didn't control for variables. And for a while they couldn't, like they just had ZoomInfo industry data. So they did really, they did their best with ZoomInfo industry data, but we don't have to do that. So for that one customer, here's what we're doing is we're basically saying, okay, 200 to 2,000 employees, uses Google Apps or Microsoft, has at least 3 people on the IT team. And then how many apps can we identify with predict leads and built with, and how many of them do we integrate with? And so it's like, okay, and then do they have a director or higher level IT leader? If all of those things are true, okay, we can sell to this person, just full stop. So that's kind of the way we've tried to solve for this. My point of view is like, look, if you don't, you have to be really honest with your SAM, and you should not be selling to people that are not in your SAM. And the nature of the SAM should indicate and dictate, and you should be able to back test against your customer base and see like, okay, this set of criteria is all present in good deals. You should not be selling to people that don't fit those qualification criteria. You shouldn't be putting ad dollars in front of them. It's actually worse, because if you do it the wrong way, you can optimize your messaging. It's in a double negative. Not only are you wasting effort, you could be optimizing your messaging to convert the wrong buyer persona. And so that's, I think, the thing that's really subtle and kind of black magic. This is kind of why we built the business model we did, is I had this experience where I drove like 700 MQLs across 3 different companies with cold email, and we crushed it. And then everything downstream failed. Like the lead follow-up was discovered. The meeting booking off of the replies was terrible. The discovery calls were terrible. The discovery call follow-up was terrible. And it's like the whole process was completely broken. And the problem was, I came in as the email guy. Like, cool, Scott, we got this. I was like, no, you don't. I can tell you don't have this. So that's kind of where I don't know what to call us. There's a couple things. Basically the thing we're doing is we're like a go-to-market continuous process improvement company. And what we're doing is we're helping you continuously level up your people, processes, and tools over time. And the way I'm explaining it to people now is like, look, there's no humanly feasible way for you to have the level of talent, and IP, and knowledge about different products and processes that we have now. It's completely impossible for you to hire. Anyone you can hire probably already works, that has all this, already works for a unicorn, and they still have skill gaps. So it's anytime you have to fix a business problem, first you have to realize, is there a problem? If you don't have good reporting or like a really good alignment cadence, you won't know that. And then you have to figure out what the root cause is. And then you have to figure out what software, if any, should I buy, or do I change or address it? And then after that, you have to design a project plan. And then after that, you have to fully implement the project plan. And a SaaS vendor is going to help you with 20 to 50% of that. And then you're going to have to find a new SaaS vendor for every one of those initiatives. And no agency is going to be psychotic enough to solve them, because there's like 50 of those little micro projects. And so my thing is like, hey, my whole thesis with B2B Catalyst is like, well, if I'm psychotic enough to keep solving the next bottleneck, eventually I'm going to come full circle and we're going to figure out all the bottlenecks, and finally starting to do that. So we just crossed 90K in MRR, and we're hoping to hit 2 or 3 million ARR in the next 6 to 12 months. So like we're on track. But that's like, this is a psychotically hard challenge. And if you haven't failed enough, like you won't want to work with us because you're like, this sounds like overkill. I was like, I mean, I don't want to do it any other way, because I just know if you can't solve all these problems, like I can't sign a client any other way, because I just hate failing. I can't emotionally. I think some of the other guys that scale and cold email alongside me, like they passed me for a while. I couldn't do it. Like what Michelle and Eric and Jordan, like I can't handle it. I can't accept that. Like I'll build an email campaign and I know I'm emailing the wrong people, or the sales process is like, I can't do it. I can't emotionally handle that. So, so that's where we are.
I'm with you. I mean, look, what we did is I was first, so next gen sales, first off, back up. I'm not sure how much you know about my background. So I was a 13 times founder. This is my 14th company is Reviops, which we're launching in mid-June. But I failed miserably, to your point, for years, right? Like the first 5 to 6 years of my life was just failing at businesses because I didn't know the things that you're describing right now. And so then at some point when I got into more B2B, account-based, high ticket, enterprise level SaaS products, DaaS products, mostly in the oil and gas industry, I realized, I mean, like cold email, the standard lead gen, ads, even content marketing really wasn't effective. It was extremely dialed account-based lists that had like micro focuses on this buying journey with very particular avatars or personas across the buying cycle. And so that was the world I came out of. And then I really didn't dive into the lead gen world until, I don't know, like several years ago, 2 years ago. And that's when Clay started becoming a thing. And so as I started taking on clients on the lead gen world, I had to go through the same exact exploration that you're describing, which is like, well, look, like, there's clearly like certain criteria or dimensions that matter. Like I even just wrote them down, like your TAM matters, to your point, your offer and price point matter, which impacts your SAM to some degree, because if you have a $3,000 price point and your cost to acquire customers $5,000 and your LTV is 10K, well, good luck.
I didn't even consider that. Maybe that's a Samsung difference. I didn't even think about the economics of the customer acquisition. That's a really good point.
Yeah. So like, but these are the things of like maturity of business. Like I have people I have a community. I'd love to have you in there at some point. This will go into the community, but I get people saying, man, I really want you to like run my cold email. And they have like 10K in revenue. I'm like, you don't have a cold email problem. Like that's not your constraint. Your constraint is you need to get more case studies. You need to make sure that you have good product market fit, product messaging fit. And so I think that to your point, like if I put like this entire conversation in a bow, is that yes, there's all these tools, and yes, there are like, kind of proven templated B2B processes that you could deploy to your business. But ultimately, like just because it is a template that people will talk about, and just because it works for certain businesses doesn't mean it's right for yours. And you need somebody, like you or like me, like Scott or like me, to come in and really understand what are these dimensions, what are these criteria, because we will literally save you like, I don't know, 6 to 12 months of your life going in the wrong direction because you're pushing on the wrong lever. And somebody said something really interesting. I think it was Tom Bailu from Quest Nutrition. He said something like, the four leverage points are, people, human capital, actual capital, content, and technology. Kind of.
I think
cliche,
that was Naval Ravikant, right? Not Naval.
No, he did say that, but then Tom came back and said that's true. He was quoting him, and then he said, but the real lever is actual discernment and judgment of when to pull each lever.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's the same thing here, which is like these are all points of leverage, like intent-based signals. That's a point of leverage. Being able to blast 500,000 people with cold email is a point of leverage. The ability to have a better dialer internal to the company is a point of leverage. The question isn't, is it a point of leverage? And it's a question of, is it right for you at this time in your business type? And I think that's ultimately what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I like that. I think that's accurate. And that's kind of the problem I really want to solve is like, look, you as a leader, like it's so hard just managing stakeholders and getting budget and like just doing your job. It's like figuring out how to like research and solve these complex and unknown problems in GTM, new markets and environments is really hard. And so having someone like us to come in and help solve that is really valuable. I think it's interesting too. I love what you said about case studies, because truthfully, in many ways for me, a really good case study is actually product market. Because to me, what a case study is, I don't see product market fit as like, oh, I'm getting referrals or this. It's like a case study to me is I had a specific set of that. It's almost like a case study for me is like, there should be an implementation plan for an account. There should be a target account profile, a product offering, and an implementation and project, not just implementation, but like deployment plan. And then an ROI on this, which is like, for this type of company, if we give them this product and they do A, B, C, and D, and we should say for this type of company and this type of team, I love profiling accounts by the titles they have. Like, do they have a demand gen function? Do they have a learning and development team? Do they have an instructional designer? Do they have a GRC head? What do they have a DevOps person? How many DevOps people? All that stuff. And so I love like, if you can take this type of company with this type of team, give them this tool, and they do A, B, C, D, E, and these are some of their initial conditions, and they got this business outcome, and this was the financial impact of that. And you tell that in a story fashion, that is proof of product market fit. That is by definition, like this is, you've created an entity. Now the hard part, and I think one of the most common failure points, is like, you need that team in place. You need the team and business model elements in place to actually replicate those results. And I think that's something people are very haphazard about sometimes with their case studies, and their targeting and their messaging. And that's one of the things I love about LinkedIn is like, a lot of marketing is kind of haphazard. People just sort of promise results and say things, and you kind of have to dumb everything down. And one of the things I like about Sense is I can just share my thoughts, and people are like, okay, smart, I should buy stuff from. But you kind of have to have this unique combination of which problems do we actually solve? What needs to be in place to actually solve it? And if you can do that, then that puts you in a really good position. And that's effectively what your case, in my view, case studies, really good case studies tell you what your actual SAM is. Because
and this gets back to the sixth sense point,
right,
which you were making, which
right,
is like, if the case study it's solving the entire problem. You're so like, this is the Hormozy equation, like 101, which
yes,
is dream outcome multiplied by likelihood of outcome divided by time and effort. And like, it's like, if your dream outcome is like revenue, but your thing actually only solves intent signals, and you're promising revenue, well, you don't actually solve the dream outcome, even though you're positioning yourself like that.
yeah.
With the sixth sense example. And so I think the case study, to your point, is the anecdote to that, because the case study says, I got the dream outcome I wanted, and here's how, over what time period and with what effort.
Well,
It actually
yeah.
answers the value equation.
Well, it's like, what should happen is you should get a case study, but what you also should pull out of the case study is like the internal change management and stakeholder alignment, which should become your sales process. And then you also should have an onboarding plan. You should be able to deploy onboarding and implementation and customer success. Like I think the right way to do this is you should be able to take those ROI stories and leverage them. Like, what should happen in an ideal customer flywheel is that gets turned into content, but that also gets used to create repeatable customer success plays. And that also gets used to create targeting, and that also gets used to create top of funnel and middle of funnel messaging. And so yeah, I think it's like, that's the hard part. And that's the problem we really want to solve in GTM is like, okay, how do you get all the pieces working, right? Because if you have too much outbound, Without enough brand awareness, you run into problems. If you have too much outbound or too much inbound, and there's like no outbound function, it's like, great, you're leaving an enormous amount of money on the table because so no one's just actually calling people who are interested in talking.
So I want to share a story with you because I think this fits well into this whole dynamic, because I think that like my whole podcast is called Next Gen Sales Systems and Sales Leaders. Obviously, you're GTM architect, but what people don't realize, and this is, I think, like this took me so long to figure out, because about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, I had the question of what is sales and marketing, which seems like a fundamental question,
Yeah,
but it's actually a very deep question,
it is.
because it took me a long time to really figure it out. And what I learned, what I was really good at doing was cold calling and getting people to jump on a call with me. And I could pitch anybody on a dream. I could sell anybody once. The problem was always getting them to pre-buy, right? And once I went through that cycle enough of selling and selling and selling, but seeing churn just absolutely just crush me, I realized it was actually a product problem and a product market fit problem more than it was a selling problem. And that's when I became really good at product management and really good at product discovery and really good at the mom test and understanding people. And what I found was, and I'll tell you the story about Wellsite Navigator, which is a company that had product market fit at the B2C level. It's a GPS solution for the oil field that helps people find oil wells in the middle of nowhere. It's basically like a little search engine that you can say, tell me where the Thomas Bobby Fisher well is, and it'll pull up the location and you can get the well address. And so they started in 2012. We found them. I was selling a competitive product in the market around 2018. And I kept on walking into oil field service companies, and they kept on saying, we already use Wellsite Navigator. So I went to my business partner at the time and I said, we should buy this company. And I called the guy up. He was in the middle of Saskatchewan, Canada. And he's like, unless you're going to give me $1 million, I'm not selling. I was like, well, maybe we can. And so we ultimately did give him $1 million. We bought the company. It was doing $300,000 in revenue. It was all D2C. So it was going to these truck drivers through the App Store. And the only thing we changed, there was zero marketing, zero sales. It was pure product-led growth.
Wow.
So that's a really critical idea. But for the next, this is 2018 through 2021, 2022, all we did was add advertising. So just a little bit of AdWords. Basically, it was AdWords and a little bit of Facebook ads. And then we increased price and we did a brand redesign and we got it to $3.5 million.
Jeez.
So 10x. So that was it. But the lesson there is product market fit was what actually won the day.
Yeah.
That was it. Like we just added a little thing to accelerate the demand capture. Now the second piece of the story gets to what you're talking about with the case studies. So we said, okay, we got to $4.5 million now, but we're stuck. We flatlined. And frankly, it's a commoditized product where in the last 5 years, 5 or 6 Me Too products came up. Having a mobile app for the oil field is no longer novel. So the question is, how do we get this with our dominant brand position, 80,000 users? How do we get it to $10 million in revenue? And so the thing that came to mind was, well, let's actually go talk to the clients and let's actually have a discussion. So what we did was we went back to them. I put out an alert that I wanted to learn about people, and I would give them a gift card for jumping on a call with me. And I constructed a mom test. And if anybody listening to this, I have a whole section on the mom test, which is a way of surveying your market without biasing them towards your ideas. And so I constructed a 50-person mom test, and I asked, why are you using our product? And they're like, to find the oil well. I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing next? They said, well, we are trying to get to the well. We're trying to drive there. And I said, well, how are you doing that now? And they said, well, we are using Google Maps. I said, well, okay, what's the problem? Where are you blocked? Well, Google Maps, this is the aha moment. Google Maps doesn't actually have the oil field mapped. So it will literally tell you to get out and walk 2 miles before you get there. Or even if it gets you there, it will take you through a gated lock, or it won't know that the route is actually like really bumpy and not good for big vehicles and it's unsafe to drive.
Yeah.
So the thing that came out of those 50 surveys was people have a real hard time navigating the oil field. So we built within 3 to 4 months, we built an MVP to allow people to draw on top of satellite imagery to create their own maps.
Mhm.
But we found that they still were doing it inaccurately.
Mhm.
So then somebody came in and said, well, what if you drive these routes? So, and then that maps it. So long story short is we rebuilt the app. We allowed people to then drive it and then map out the oil field themselves. And then we launched the product. And it's exactly what people wanted, but the product sucked. And so we were like, we had to spend another year rebuilding the product so doesn't have bugs. So I'm sharing this with people that the GTM constraint was actually, it's not, can I get in front of people?
Yeah.
It was, can I build the right product in the first place?
Yes.
And then can I build it to a quality standard that allows me to actually continue to sell it? So I can
Yeah.
say at Wellsite Navigator, as the example, it took me from conception on the enterprise product to launch. It took me 2 years of iteration and feedback and rebuilding and quality assurance before I even got to my first case study. And people just think like, oh, I'm going to go launch a brand. I'm going to have my case study in 2 weeks. And now I can scale. And it's like anyone who's actually tried to do it knows that that's not how it works. And so that's why I just want everyone listening to this, especially if you're like less than 30K in revenue, to just like really realize that product product management and product
Yeah.
development is actually your number one GTM strategy.
I would agree with that. And the way I think of this is why I love services is like, to me, what I learned running a service business, like a B2B service business for 8 years, is like, at the end of the day, people pay you to improve their job performance enough to be worth money. Like, it's easier to hire you than to hire another person. And that's it. Like, you're delivering people improvement. So it's kind of like, if you can do that, you have to really understand what people do. And I think one of the funny things is like, some of the SaaS, the understanding of the SaaS use cases shockingly bad. Like, I'll talk to people and they'll say things. I'm like, brother, you have no idea how this person works. They're not thinking. And the hard part with SaaS is you never solving for one persona. You're solving for 3 to 10. Like for outreach, who their actual jobs to be done are executive leadership team, VP of sales, VP, possible RevOps, enablement, product marketing, BDR managers, BDRs, account executives. Like, those are all the personas, and all of those people, outreach has some significant gaps. Like, they didn't have halfway decent attribution until like 6 months ago. So that was just being done by RevOps or BDR managers in spreadsheet, or agencies in spreadsheet. That's to me, that's like, and I think the interesting thing where it gets interesting with apps is where it's like, sometimes there's a non-obvious cost savings, where I'm trying to convince this company to do this AI integration. Like, you really need pipeline attribution. I know they need pipeline attribution because I worked with another AI messaging app and they didn't have pipeline attribution work. And I was like, it took weeks to get it on fuck. And then the pipeline was, we would have behaved very differently if we had been able to see the pipeline attribution in real time. Like, shit, that was not as good as we thought. So I think that's the interesting thing, where it's just like, okay, this is knowing how to give people information, how to actually solve problems for a lot of different users at once. That's where SaaS is hard. If you can do that well, then you win. But I think that the multi-stakeholder thing is the nature of the beast. And usually people optimize for one user. Like, you could argue that's probably Sixth Sense. Sixth Sense in many ways was optimized for like VPs of marketing. It didn't optimize for marketing ops necessarily, or for SDR leaders, or like, you could argue the flip side with Info, where it's like, they were really good at selling to sales leaders and they sucked at selling to marketers, and they tried to, and they're still struggling with that, and have a bad brand rep with marketers. So that's one of those things where it's like, I think just really, one of the things I love about business, the more I learn about it, is like, it all comes back down to empathy. It's about understanding other people, how to serve them. Do a really, really good job, and if you're obsessed with that, you get a lot of good results. But if you don't do that, then life is pain. So yeah, it's
I have something to add on there. So
please.
I feel like the I remember 8 years ago I asked, how do you do market research? Again, I like to ask these questions that seem kind of dumb, but they're actually really deep. And the reason that I'm asking them is because they're actually relatively counterintuitive in terms of the answer. And because I thought there was a book, I thought there was like a study, I thought there was like, you'd go pull 10 websites and you'd look at like what the competitors were saying and maybe listen to a few podcasts and you'd figure it out. And it took me the better part of about 7 to 8 years, especially across my failed companies, where I realized the way that you do market research is you have 1,000 conversations. And that's like the thing that nobody wants to actually say, is that it's like there is no shortcut. There's no like obvious answer. And the actual subtle nuances of people's problems and the work that they have to do and the reason that they'd even be willing to buy and adopt your solution, it's buried under 5 layers of subconscious that they might not even be aware of. And so the only
Yeah.
way that you could possibly like begin to understand them is, one, talk to a lot of them, and two, literally go live with them and work with them. So for me, when I launch a SaaS product from scratch, it's what my business partner says, that I go tribal. So for example, when
Yeah.
we launched a company called Source Water in the oil field, it was a oil field data analytics company. Like I literally have 1,000 pages. This sounds crazy to people. A
Yeah.
1,000 pages of memos of ride-alongs with prospective customers before we even had the product, because I literally was like, I have to go sit with these people, eat their
Yeah.
lunch, literally eat their lunch, ride along and see what their day is like. So that by the time I go as a product manager to develop a user experience, I'm speaking from deep experience. And I go, oh, well, Fred said this and then Bob said that. And people read like the Lean Startup and 4 Steps to the Epiphany. And, they think, oh, I'm going to go talk to a couple customers. And it's like, no, 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 go talk and live their life. So that's the way that and I think we're saying the same thing, is have empathy, but then go so much further than you ever thought you could. And the output of that isn't like the very first thing I try to get to is the top 5 problems people have. And what I want to do is literally be able to put it into a deck and say, problem 1, solution 1, problem 2, solution 2, no products, no like brands, just like, do you guys agree with my idea around problem solution?
Yeah.
And if I don't get everyone going, dude, that's my top problem. Oh my
Yeah.
God, I can't believe you thought about this. Oh my God, you read my dreams.
Yeah. Yeah.
If they're not saying that at a messaging level, I don't begin to develop a Figma file or a line of
Yeah. I
code.
love that.
And that could take 2 years. People don't get how long this understanding and discovery takes.
I will say there is a bit of a shortcut that we use in GTM, which is if you get, so the way when we're going outbound 0 to 1, the first thing I do is I interview the top reps or founders or product marketers, just people whoever knows the voice of the customer best, really deep conversation with them. And then we turn that into like an ICP, like a data-driven ICP, like what 3 to 10 data points indicate specifically this is a good fit. And then I turn that into a clay table. And then I back test on existing customers and one-loss deals. And if that all checks out and it scales well, we then turn around and run like as much of the world as it makes sense through that audience. And so at that point, we have like a pretty locked in list of accounts. And then what we do is we look at the one-loss deals. We find all the contacts in the buying committee. I throw in the cloud. I have AI score it. And it's like, okay, here are all the different buckets of people based on their job responsibilities and metrics that'd be worth reaching out to. All right. I spot checked all of these. Realistically, there are 4 personas, right? I get a list of keywords and then you run that list of keywords on a list of target accounts. And then by the end of that process, it's like, okay, I have everyone. If I do that right, I have everyone in the world that makes talk to. And then what I do is I pick one persona in a segment and I run it through Titanix and load in Nooks. And then we have 50 to 100 cold call conversations. And if we can get close to 10% of them take meetings after 100 cold call conversations, which doesn't take long, like with that stack, we're talking 25 hours of dialing off of a list that's like clean, was really damn clean. Usually if we do our job right, if it's scalable or not. And then not only do you know it's scalable, you actually have the entire known universe. We did that for a company recently where they're trying to sell location intelligence data. And they were like, oh, we want to start with ad tech. Well, what we did is we didn't try to figure out who's in the ad tech industry. What we said was, what are the use cases for location? We identified 8 of them and a few key job functions that we literally we scraped companies and we were like, oh, we're going to get outside of ad tech. Well, we're actually getting traction with software companies because the location intelligence, because the use case scraping was so good. So like we now have this universe of like 1,700 companies and like 10,000 contacts. Like, okay, this is our universe. Right? We have to set this up on a continuously with very optimized workflow. But now it's like, okay, you now know everyone in the world that makes sense to talk to. Now, are there a million other things you can do on top of that? Absolutely. Website intent, new hires, all that shit, champion job changers, all that good stuff. But if I can start, I love phone because like, I love what you said about the subconscious part, because reading intent from email is like kind of this weird black magic voodoo game. And the hard part was the statistically significant test in email. Dude, it takes like a week or 2 to just run one iteration. It takes like 2 days to do a meaningful script iteration because you're constantly getting live feedback from the calls. You're picking up all this contextual conversation. So like, we're for that company I was talking about, we're into persona number 2 or 3. And it's funny because one of the reps we're working with is like, yeah, the script doesn't feel but totally buttoned up yet. I was like, dude, your conversation to meeting rate is 12%. That's fucking awesome for a persona you never called. 20 conversations in. I was like, how button up a little more? I was like, yeah, we're on track though. The point is like, dude, don't freak out. Like you definitely have message market fit here. We just have to tighten up the sales. We just have to tighten up the training materials for the other reps. Like we're in really good shape. So I think that's how we sort of solve this. And then but the thing for me that I think a lot of companies miss is you need 1,000 conversations if you're targeting size. But if you lock in the targeting enough where you're talking to the same set of people with the same set of problems, this is a hell of a lot easier. So I think that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, I'm kind of being tongue in cheek with 1,000 conversations. If I'm being realistic, I would say 50 really solid conversations on ICP is ideal. I think you could get away with 20 to 25 and still have a really good understanding if you have a very dialed list. If you can have 1,000 conversations, you're now the subject matter expert and people will pay you $2,000 an hour. It was the funniest thing when that happened to me in the oil and gas industry. I became like one of the top experts in oil and gas, water management. And all of a sudden I had PE funds calling me being like, what's your hourly rate? And I joked and I was like, that's $3,000 an hour. Cause I thought they were kidding. They started paying me $2,000 an hour, just to tell them about the market.
Wow.
And I really do think like if you are a entrepreneur, founder, product manager, or even a early stage sales rep, you should really try to get to that level of subject matter expertise because it's the most compelling thing to one, only to build the product, but 2, when you're on the sales call, it's evidence to people when you know what you're talking about. People will be like, okay, I trust you. Like to your point, you said on LinkedIn, you say stuff that is correct because you know it, but it comes from a deep well of knowledge and people just go, oh, I trust this guy. So anything he says,
Yeah,
I don't have to think about, is he right? No, he's thought about this so deeply and talked to so many people that there's not a shadow of a doubt that you have a solid perspective on it.
so I think that's similar for what it is for me. It's like the reason I'm doing this is I have this really weird experience where I've done automated high scale campaigns across LinkedIn, email, and phone for 6 years across a wide variety of markets, everything from e-commerce to retail to, there's a little bit of SAP implementation, oil and gas, permanent cosmetics, education, like so many different industries. And I've touched enough of them where I'm kind of like, okay, I know what this looks like at scale with automation in a lot of different situations. And then I know the automated side, and I'm also learned a lot about what should a sales team look like? What's account based look like? And so you put all that together, and I look at these things, and I'm seeing this in a fundamentally different, bundled and unbundled way that a lot of people have, and this is why we're ending up in a product advisory relationship with companies. Like, I should do that. Here's why. This is the use case you need. Because there's these really subtle system constraints that's just not obvious. And so I think the hard part is like, there's no shortcut for really understanding your market. Insight is like, you have to be able to understand. It's like, if you want to be the market leader, you have to understand the problem better than your prospect. If you don't understand the problem better than your prospect, someone will smoke you a bit. So, and you have to be passionate and curious enough to want to do that, and then be motivated to like communicate that to a large number of people. It's not easy.
I want to touch on a couple of things you said, and I might jump around, but there's three things that came to mind. One was this diverse experience, and I think this is especially important for people that do not have that diverse experience, where they've maybe worked in one company or two companies, and so that their lens of reality is like, this is what works,
right?
This is how you do it. And they don't see all the edges of why things may or may not work, or where the constraints may pop up given the context, like we started the whole conversation with. So I want to speak to that for a second, because I think that, like, for example, I'm going to use a couple wildly different markets for people as an example, just to describe how things can look like they're just so smart on one side, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go do that because it's working for them, and then it just crushes for you, and then you justify your incompetence because it's not working, but it's actually not your fault. So for example, Prosp.ai, new LinkedIn automation tool. I really like Alfie, who's the founder. He was on the podcast, but is a perfect example of hot market, very clear value prop, very clear ICP, or a very broad reaching ICP where everyone can use it if they're on LinkedIn. It's one of those things where it's like, everyone on LinkedIn wants to get more connections and more results. They want more leads. They want more people to follow them. They want more engagement. It's kind of just built into the nature of the system. So when you have a company like Prosp come along and go, hey, we're going to automate your outreach and your post comment response management, and we're going to do it in a way that is faster, easier, better, more automated, more we'll call it streamlined than the older way of doing stuff, it's an easy thing to promote. And then you're promoting that thing on the platform, LinkedIn, that you're actually benefiting from. So you go and you say, do a lead bait post. Anybody listening, like, people go, if you comment below X, I'll send you some resource. Their entire GTM strategy was that, which was like, we booked over 55 meetings this week through this very simple tactic in this one particular tool. If you want access to the program, comment X and I will send it to you. That was their entire method of going to market. Now, it was crushing for them. And in fact, I hired their LinkedIn guy who was doing their post management, and he showed me their results, and it was like literally 15 minutes. Every single day, minute of the day was booked. And I was thinking, like, oh my God, like, they figured it out. They have the Holy Grail. Now, this was me only like 6 months ago. I should have known better. But then I'm like, okay, let's try it on me in cold email. And it turns out that, like, yes, it works. Ironically, I'm like, apparently, if you look on Trigify, I'm like a top 10 in North America, like high engagement for cold email and lead generation, which is hilarious to me. But the point is that, did it get me 15-minute books every 15 minutes, slamming my entire schedule? No. I maybe had like 50 meetings from it, Now, I added 7,000 followers. I've added 1,000 people to my school group. There's been some benefits, but it wasn't a full schedule. And I'm looking at it, comparing myself, cold email agency, revenue operations agency, to LinkedIn automation SaaS application. And it's kind of obvious why it's different, right?
Different ICP.
The price, sorry?
Different ICP and price point.
Exactly. Different ICP and price point. And so same thing like with, like, I don't know, cold email. You say video production companies. We have one video production company that generates 50 meetings a week through cold email, pure cold email. That's it. And it's like, well, wow, Ben, but why can they do that? I'm like, well, because they have an unlimited TAM. They can go anywhere in the world. They literally have like an unlimited ICP. Any B2B business who has an event coming up needs it. So it's like, yeah, it's an easy thing to, it's like if you walk into the rain and there's a shit ton of rain coming down, you're going to get wet. That's what they have. Whereas if you have your very tight 2,000 person TAM, it's like, of course, cold email is not going to work. So
Yeah.
I just think that like,
It's funny though that you say the event thing, because I talked to a video production company. I love that you said the event part, because I think that's worth highlighting there. I talked to a video production company working with two of the biggest names in cold email, and they were not getting good results. I was frustrated, and I looked at his email, and I was just like, I looked at his website, and I was just like, yeah, I know why you're suffering, because you don't have any business outcomes. Your website is optimized for someone who's already decided they want a video production company. You're saying we're good at video production. Now, if I scroll down, there's some use cases where it's like, oh, we help this company increase student enrollments. If they built a business around we're going to help universities increase student enrollment, that's the big thing I think is hard, is like you're selling use cases for a specific persona in a specific type of company. That's what people buy, is the use case, not the product. And if you don't understand that and position around that, you're screwed. And so I think I love that you said that with the video production company is what made the TAM possible. That you would have had a much harder time if you hadn't said, this is the use case.
indeed. And I also think it's interesting that like, if you have a very broad offer like that, like, do you want video? And then like, this gets back to Eugene Schwartz's awareness scale. If you
Right.
haven't read Breakthrough Advertising, people listening to this book, go buy the book. But it's like, people are so obviously aware, solution aware of what video can do.
Right.
Like, it's like, oh, I need to video. Like, we have to be online, obviously, you know? You don't have to explain, well, there's this thing called video and you need it to, like, you don't, that's all that's been explained. And it seems obvious to say that, but I think a lot of people they underestimate the degree to which their market still needs to be educated to understand the need for the solution that they're selling.
Yeah.
And I think that when you have like a very obvious solution aware stage of the market where people are like, of course I know what video is, and it's really just massive demand, like you see with video production, it just makes everything easier. It's like, so you could be a kind of like bad at cold email. You could even have a bad hook, even a bad offer, and you can still do quite well. Whereas like you could have like the most dialed hook, the perfect price point, like the most amazing everything else, but be in a very small, tight market that doesn't respond well to cold email, and you're screwed. Or you have a massive market like lawyers, for example. I cannot get lawyers to respond to cold email. Doesn't matter what I do. Doesn't matter how amazing the offer is. Hell, I can't get my own lawyer to respond to me.
Right.
Because they're always in court.
Yeah.
So I just think that like putting a cap on this with the diverse experience, I think that like for people listening to this is that the right answer to what product, what SaaS app should I use, what tactic, what strategy, what process, you know, it really just depends. And it depends upon a bunch of criteria that we're certainly not going to cover on this podcast.
Well, yeah. I think if you're looking for growth, we kind of said it earlier. You just need to understand. If the most important thing is you have to understand your customer. The easiest thing to do is just, where the hell do your customers hang out? They're probably hanging out online, probably going to be LinkedIn or Facebook. Like this is, most people in B2B are aware of our Facebook group. Like on LinkedIn, find Facebook groups. Just be where they are. There are massive software and marketing businesses built primarily on Facebook groups. And that has its own challenges. But like, I think that's the answer really, is that you just have to be obsessed with your customers. And if you pay enough attention to them, you will find out how to reach.
So the second thing I wanted to talk about was, this is going back into the conversation, but it's post-lead capture, conversion optimization. And I think that the discussion of conversion optimization, like what does that mean for anybody listening? In the D2C world, direct-to-consumer world, where you have a website and you're selling, say, e-commerce, it's very obvious to have this conversation. Yeah. Okay, how many people come to the website? How many people go to the product page? How many people click to add to cart? How many people go to the cart to check out? How many people get to the shipping page, etc.? How many take the upsell, the downsell? That type of conversion optimization is very obvious for that market. Anybody who does e-commerce, because they are optimizing for very thin margins. Like their cost to acquire might be $40. And so that means their average order value has to be above $40 by like 2 to 3x, right?
Yeah.
And so if they miss $10, $20 on a conversion event, it's like devastating to them. It can actually make the whole business's unit economics go to shit. Whereas I think like this optimization conversation that we're having, it doesn't come up in B2B as much because the margins and the unit economics tend to be different. But then the problem is that
Well,
business owners, good.
it's also venture backed. So as long as that's the thing is like most SDR teams are hilariously wasteful, but but the thing is, it's like most SDR teams, from my perspective, most outbound sales and marketing orgs are hilariously wasteful, but they have no incentive to be better. Like as long as they're above benchmarks, if they're raising money, then they don't care, right? From my perspective, most playbooks are shit because there's not enough, it's not a real process. It's just a collection of best practices, right? Process is I take this specific set of input, I do A, B, C, D, and I get the other thing out the other side. From that perspective, very little most companies don't have an outbound process because they don't have a clearly defined enough set of inputs and outputs.
It's interesting. So I'm gonna put a box around venture backed because I want to talk about that because I know you speak about that quite a bit.
Yeah.
And I think that's an interesting direction I want to take this. Also I want to say in terms of like cost to acquire, let me show you. I'm going to share my screen. I want to show you something that I think is interesting, and I'll explain to anybody listening on Spotify or without visuals what we're looking at. So bear with me, and you can tell me if you're actually seeing the correct screen. Is this coming through for you? This return
It's
on outbound?
backwards.
Okay. Let me stop share, and let me share again. Entire screen. Okay. How about now?
Yeah.
Okay, so here's what's interesting for everyone listening. We have a return on outbound calculator, and it's basically a funnel. So we have the input of a cost per meeting set. So there's a whole discussion on how you get to the cost per meeting set. It's a function of like all the tools you're using, the ad spend, whether you have a bunch of email infrastructure, your costs on your human capital, et cetera. Let's just assume that we know what the cost per meeting is. And then we can start to work down the funnel in terms of, okay, how many meetings are actually set? In this example, let's say there's 100 meetings being set. So that means for 100 meetings at $700 a pop, you're spending $70,000. Now, assuming we can make some assumptions here, let's say it's 80% conversion of meeting set to meeting showed. Now, maybe in real life, it's 60%. I don't know. I'm just using 80% as an example. So that means 80 out of the 100 show, but now you're spending not $700 for the meeting set, you're spending $875 for them to show. And then, okay, let's say 75% of them are qualified. Everyone will have a different standard of qualification. Some people use BANT, right? A MedPIC or something like that. So budget, authority, need, timing. So whatever it is for you, but let's assume that it's 75% of the meetings that show are
That's
qualified,
pretty high.
which I think is high.
I will say
it's very high.
Because for
Extremely
like
high.
for meetings that become pipeline, enterprise is more like 30.
Oh yeah, agreed. So
But
30
the
is
AOV
much
in that situation is more likely to be, I don't know, like a 50 or 100 or 150K.
Right. Yeah, we're aligned there. So the point is, it's debatable, right? It could be 20%, it could be 80%. It just depends upon your market. So we're going to go with 30%. So now you have 24 of the 100 meetings that were set that are qualified. So that means you're spending $2,900 for a qualified meeting. Now, let's say that you have a nice solid 30% close rate on qualified deals, and now you're down to 7.2. So 7 out of the 100 are closing. That means you're spending $9,700 to acquire that customer.
Yeah.
And this is what people don't realize is like, if you actually do the math, it's like 90+% of the entire cost to acquire is post-lead capture conversion optimization.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
It's wild. And people don't talk about that. They are always like, oh, what's the cost per lead? What's the cost per lead? And it's like, no. Like, it's like, what's your cost to acquire?
Yeah.
And like,
Yeah.
can you even make this make sense? So for me, like, when it comes to, especially in cold email, if a company doesn't have an AOV of at least 15,000 and an LTV of at least 30,000, I don't really want to even begin to work with them because I just know
Yeah.
they're not going to get the ROI they need.
Well, the other hard
You
part
know?
with cold email is just it requires so much education when someone does engage. Like you're just better off. Like it's just not an efficient way. 1-to-1. It's like the classic 7-hour rule. It's like, yeah, it's probably you could do those 7 hours of conversation on sales calls. Paying someone to educate someone is pretty hard. And you multiply that number of conversation hours across all the different buyer personas and the stakeholder. Most people don't want to do that. I think that's an interesting element to this is like, I like the lens of like, who is my qualified audience? How do I get sufficient how do I get sufficient education time in front of them? Where they can actually do this. Like my snarky take on some of the meeting to ops stuff is like I was actually having this conversation today with a RevOps leader. And it's like, yeah, a lot of companies, the outbound close rate is really low, and the meeting, a lot of outbound deals end in like lost no decision state. And I'm like, well, I actually sent him the email. Like my snarky answer for that is, hi, I'm an account executive that doesn't know how to start a business initiative or communicate with multiple stakeholders unless my champion does it for me. That's what this says to me. It's like, you're admitting you don't know how to sell. Is basically what this means. You don't and I think that's the nuance is this. If you can actually, and this is the hard thing about B2B in general, is like, you have to learn how to communicate to like 20 different types of people, or at least 3 or 4. If you can do that well, then this starts to make much more sense, and you have a better product, and you have a better offer. But you need to solve for all of those personas and all those use cases.
So one thing I also wanted to touch, and I think this brings it full circle back to the beginning. I want to show you this diagram that I have, and I'll explain it to anybody who's listening. But it's what we call results by the numbers, and I actually have this in my pitch deck for my own agency because I want to set a clear expectations on the channels that people are using, which is cold email, LinkedIn outbound, and cold calling. And as we see here, the funnel goes like this. You essentially email, or you contact them on LinkedIn, or you call them, right? And then some people reply on email, some people are accepted. They accept the connection request on LinkedIn, and on cold calling, some people answer. And then the next part is
I will
prospects
say,
interested.
prospects call that is low on the call side. You can,
Even in terms of answered.
oh yeah, like you should be able, if you have good phone data, you should be able to get at least, you should be able to reach at least. But I would say the answer and meeting set is extremely low in both of those cases. We would,
Yeah, is the problem with these numbers is it's trying to account for all markets.
oh,
And I think it wildly changes based upon the market and the region. So for example, like in China, like we know that the answer rate is like 15 to 20% because people are more open to taking cold calls. Whereas like we have absolutely beat up this market, and it's in the United States, and it's like harder to get through. Plus,
you can reach 15 to 25% of any market in the United States.
Mm. And now, so let's walk through that. So what are you doing to ensure cell phone quality?
Tight necks.
What's it called?
Tight necks. It's so tight necks basically as a process they use to figure out who's likely to answer the phone. And they score millions of phone numbers with a combination of some human verification and calling with carrier enrichment and a bunch of number enrichment, a bunch of other data sources. And what this does at scale basically is it means if I give them a list of 1 million phone numbers, they can tell me which ones of those people, if they do enough scoring, they can essentially tell pretty much everyone who's going to answer the phone. This started probably,
for some reason your audio keeps coming in and out.
I'm sorry. My internet probably tanked a little bit. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
This is why we love phone, by the way, is you throw a list in tight necks and you're essentially guaranteed.
How do you spell that?
Titan, Titanx. I know the CEO and the new CRO. And it essentially, if you Titans, if you sort of do the highest tier of their scoring, you get P1 percentage of somewhere in like the 13 to 25% range. What that means is a P1, if you call that P1 from a clean phone number 7, 8 times, you have like an 80 to 90% chance of reaching. So I had a rep call on Friday. He booked 2 meetings in half an hour. He had a 40% dial to connect rate. Now, dial to connect is actually the wrong way to measure it. The real question is if you fully work a list, you can, a certain number of people will pick up. And this is the funny part, right? Is it turns out that the way dialers and parallel dialers think is I just need to call more people. Well, it turns out like 20% of the market very, very likely to answer the phone. And they will pick up. They will pick up if you call them enough times. But 80% of the market, you could call them 100 times and they're probably not. So that's the weird thing about phone intent. And so if you have this phone intent layered on top of scoring millions of records from different data providers, they permanently know who all the best data providers are and who picks up the phone. And so it's like, imagine you could write an email sequence and you didn't have to do any copywriting and you would get a 20% reply rate.
Exactly.
That's why we love this. This would be a very different story if we didn't have that pipeline locked in with them and we have a process. But anyway, so, and the meeting set where I bet you the industry average on meeting set that probably happens because the lists aren't clean or reps are bad. But anyway, I'm quibbling with numbers, but I love the benchmarks in general.
So I think this is like for anyone listening, just so I can draw a conclusion for them, the outcome of this is when you look at these funnels, cold email, LinkedIn outbound, cold calling, you have 100,000 prospects in cold email, but you only actually end up with 5 won deals. And on LinkedIn, you have 100,000 prospects and you end up with 210 deals. Now we're going to talk about why that's not realistic.
Yes.
And now cold calling, even though these benchmarks might be low, significantly low, even 2 to 3 times off, we end up with 21 deals. So it's 5 deals cold email in this scenario, 210 on LinkedIn, and then 21 on cold calling. So then the question is, well, why the hell wouldn't you go all in on LinkedIn? Well, let me tell you, it's because LinkedIn has natural bottlenecks,
Yes.
right? One is like you can only send out so many DMs and messages per day per account. So your constraint is actually in the profile itself. Now, then there's this question of, well, how do you overcome that? And the answer is, well, you have to get more profiles. And there are people that sell profiles and they can act as SDRs, but it's not really scalable. It's sketchy as fuck. Yeah, exactly. But that's the reality though. It's like if you're doing a pure cold outbound, you're using a prosp type of like outbound, or even if you just do it manually, like we're talking about like 20 to 50, maybe 100 messages per day max. So the difference between cold email and LinkedIn is cold email scales immediately, whereas LinkedIn never scales. Now, cold calling is an interesting thing because like I will say on the Wellsite Navigator front, cold email did not work at all. LinkedIn, none of our prospects were on LinkedIn. So the only thing we had was either going to events or cold calling. So we made 130,000 cold calls in the last 12 months at Wellsite Navigator. Now, I wish I had this Titan X thing. I wish I had that. But the bottom line is that we drove several $1 million in revenue through pure cold calling. And it's so funny because like nobody talks about cold calling anymore. It's like, but to your point, it's like the most beneficial thing from messaging market fit, quick access. It scales. Like if you want to add more people, you can add more dialers.
You know what's subtle too about cold calling is cold email. You can beat those 2.5% reply rates, but what it does, it have to do a lot of cutting up of the lists into different segments to change a few words and make sure the segmentation is right. With a good rep, they can adapt on the fly. So your ability to, your need to segment the market is a lot lower because the rep can adapt on the fly live to the prospect, and that solves the personalization problem. You still need to throw a human at it to a degree, but it's much easier, I would argue, than cold email in that regard. Because it's the segmentation problem. That's kind of where the last mile of the conversion rate is am I saying the right thing to the right person?
Exactly. Yeah, it's live time feedback of messaging. It's like you can iterate on the fly. And that's also why it's like, I generally speaking will tell people, don't even begin cold emailing if you haven't made like 500 dials. It's
Right.
like, go talk to people to find out your messaging, because that's going to impact the cold email. Now, I will say that like, if you're really confident in your messaging, for me, this goes back to like the list. Like, I'm launching RevyOps right now. Revy, it's REVYOPS.com, RevyOps.com. And it's like a data management platform, not yet another application, but a data management platform that actually syncs all other applications. So it's a central database with an integration layer that hooks up to Clay and hooks up to Instantly and HubSpot, and it creates a central record. And my big bullish idea is that all of us RevOps, GTM people, cold email people are actually like not creating their own master lists. They're not becoming their own Zoom info,
Mm.
even though they're pulling across all these different
I
places. So
don't
I
know if
want to
that's
solve that
legal.
problem.
I don't know if that's legal with the data processing rules.
Well, if they're pulling lists across all clients, they have individual clients.
Mm.
And so they can still build individual lists for those clients. And then they can manage those lists.
Yeah.
So now, whether they use that data or not, I don't think anybody could know or stop them.
Right.
So whether it's legal or not, I mean,
Right. That's fair.
that's a question. And frankly, I'm not going to tell them what to do with it. So I'm just a medium for them to collect the information.
Right.
But that's actually not the primary use case. My point in saying all of that is that, actually, I just lost my trail.
Sorry.
Where?
Probably
No, it's
three.
okay. Yeah, but what was I was getting at? I was about to make a point. I forgot. I know. Brain fart. What were we talking about before?
I don't remember. We're talking about different channels. Yeah, like cold calling versus LinkedIn. Why no one talking about cold calling anymore?
Yeah, oh, okay, right. So the reason that I would bring up RevyOps is because when I was going to market, I knew that, look, could you use this tool be used for a CRO? Yeah, maybe. Could it be used for some guy who's on RevOps just building lists and just like, wants like an extra central database? Sure. But for me, like the thing I knew for a fact is that it solved the top 5 problems of cold email agencies specifically. And so what I did was I came up with a list of, I just went to like Instantly's expert section, uh, Smartly's expert section, Clay's expert section, Bison's expert section. I just scraped them and I just created a list of 300 to 400 people, and I just sent them one-to-one DMs. And I got an 80% reply rate, and of those, it was about a 40% meeting show rate.
Jeez.
And it was because the message was the product market fit was perfect. My messaging of the problems was documented, and I shared it with them. And when I sent it to them, I said, "Hey, take a look at this, and if it makes sense, we can jump on a call." And they'd always come back and say, "Oh my God, you perfectly solved the problems that we're experiencing on data management. Sure, I want to talk to you." And so,
Yeah.
the point that I'm trying to make to the audience here who's listening is just like, if you have really tight problem solution fit, you have the perfect list, and you go through LinkedIn, and you don't have to automate this. I literally just did one-to-one. I would send 20 messages a day for several weeks. You can get through the entire TAM, and you can set 50 to 100 meetings
Yeah.
with very little effort. And so I think that like, to a great degree, people just overthink this. Like, it's
Yeah.
like, you don't need to automate everything.
Well,
You know what I mean?
they overthink the automation when it's like, look, the automation isn't even necessarily worth it. What they underthink is, what does my audience actually care about? So, yeah, I think that's
So
the part.
yeah, exactly. And that's where it comes back to deeply understanding the audience, having very clear messaging around that, pulling very tight lists. And it's like, if you do that, 99% of your problem is solved.
Yeah.
I think that like, people over value the power of cold email because it scales, but they underestimate the complexity of the technology, and then the email service providers' willing or interest in preventing you from succeeding.
Right.
And so it's like, I guess like where we can all come down to this is like, perhaps, I know we've been on for an hour and a half, so perhaps we could end this with, what if we had to advise a founder or a CMO or a owner of a business right now, and they're like, I need to sell this product. What final words would you give them based upon all this craziness? Because I'm sure people are like, okay, you guys told me it's really hard and I have no clue where to
Yeah.
start. Like, what do I do?
Well,
Like,
so
what
it's
would you
like,
say?
it's, if you're early stage, I think it's basically 3 phases. It's like, first, get your first case study, right? Get your first case study from a customer where they paid you and you got them more value than they provide. Once you have a case study, find more people like the person you just got a case study, turn them into a customer, get more case studies. And that process you can repeat ad nauseum. Like that's really what it boils down to. And once you have a go-to-market engine running, and there's a lot of different ways to do that, events or inbound or outbound, million things. Prioritize conversation. Once you have that live, then the question you basically just ask is like, if you're confused, map out your whole process and figure out what's broken. Like, a good rule of thumb is like, hey, if you look at your funnel, whichever number you can add 10% to, and that's the biggest improvement, that's usually your bottleneck. So it just, you have to measure the right numbers, but just mapping out your process is usually a good way to mapping out your process, getting your actual numbers. A lot of times you do that a couple times, the number jumps out to you, or just socialize it around. And if you're a little later stage and you want to make something that really scales, you can obviously talk to me, and my team. But that's, I think that's the basic number, is like, start with the case study, get a customer that made more money than they paid you, got more quantifiable value than they paid you first. And then, like, okay, you do that first and then do the next thing. So that's what I would do. I think to me, that's the order of the thing. A case study, find more customers like them and get more case studies. And then once you have a go-to-market engine going, okay, you have to optimize the next bottle. It's like you did with your app with for oil and gas companies. You just have to, you're just what's the next bottleneck. And at some point there'll be product, at some point there'll be marketing or some contacts. That's the thing, right? You just have to optimize the next bottleneck.
So I'm going to add on, which is I'm going to bifurcate this into two categories, which is you're a startup, you're not a startup. Okay, so if you're a startup, I would say double down on ICP and intelligence gathering and understanding. Be willing to cold call if you have to, or get referrals into people, not to sell, but specifically just to talk to them. I highly recommend checking out my mom test course in the free community in my school group. But it teaches you just how to structure questions in the right way. And I would say if you're really not clear on your messaging, if you're kind of still iffy on the ICP, really make sure that you're dialing that in before you do any type of acceleration on automation or cold email or anything like that. Assuming that you have a very dialed ICP, then it really comes down to, I believe, do you have a differentiated, really good offer?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, like, really double down on like making sure that your not only your offer is solid, but also is your product and your service actually good? Like,
Yeah.
is it good? And I think that leads into the case study, because like if you have a very clear ICP with a very clear offer, and your product is good, you have those three things, then the case study follows. And then you can start to consider like, okay, how can I scale? Now, so that's one side of the equation. The second side of the equation, I would say, is assuming that you have those three things, is what lever should I pull? And I would say, like, as a rule of thumb, this is like a very blanket statement, but I would say as a rule of thumb, if you have 50,000, you have less than 50,000 accounts in your TAM, I would highly recommend not going with cold email as a starting point, because it gets very constrained very quickly unless you have like some very, very compelling offer. And you likely will run out of TAM quickly. Some people
Yeah.
say it's 15,000 in the TAM. I say it's 50,000 because I
I
just get
care more
crushed
about qualified contacts than accounts.
Mm.
For me, the break
What do you
point.
define as qualified?
Sorry.
What do you define as qualified contacts?
I have data points that show they are similar to case studies that I have. And that's part of our
Okay.
initial process.
So you don't care about the account so much as the contacts, and there could be five.
I care more about
contacts.
how many contacts, how many people, because the dynamics have really come to, it's really more how many people do we know we can start deal cycle with. learning how to sell to a new champion profile is hard as fuck, unbelievably hard. And sometimes it just completely fails. And so like, you have to get really clear on like, okay, what is the actual dynamic? What do you actually do? What can you actually make work? That's just really unbelievably hard. And so I think that's just quite difficult to do. So really it's like, if you, the way I define a qualified contact is a couple of things. Number one, if I had a conversation with this person, they are capable of starting a deal cycle, like, and actually getting a deal closed. Like for us BDR managers, I don't think I've closed one deal with a BDR manager. Very difficult. VP of
Is
sales,
that because of the psychographics of that person? Is that because
political
they don't have
power.
budget
It's
authority?
a little bit. I think it's theoretically possible. Most BDRs don't have the political navigation skills. Most BDR managers don't have the political navigation skills to get a deal across the line for us.
I see.
So it's like they have to have the juice. They don't need necessarily the formal authority, but they have to have the juice to actually get this working. Number one. Number two, after that is like, if that person could buy, would that company want to pay you more in a year? That's how I define a qualified account of contact. So with technical terms, similar titles to one deal contacts, and the 3 to 10 data points indicating that they would have an NRR of over 100%. Net revenue retention.
Mhm.
So to me, if you look at those, and then you kind of just look at those metrics we evaluated there, and it's just like, okay, all right, we looked at all those metrics. What outbound model makes the most sense, or what model makes the most sense given the size of what you're doing?
What do you think in terms of like, okay, so let's say that we think we have these ICPs dialed and we think that they're in the qualification, they're correctly qualified. I think I would argue that it's hard to know some qualification standards until you call. So I'm kind of operating at the list building level, not so much the qualification level. But I'm curious, assuming that you could know that, how many contacts would you want in a TAM or a SAM in order to justify cold email as a channel?
At least bare minimum, and you need to be very thoughtful at 10. And I would feel much better with 30 or 50. Because the thing is, it's like the thing is number of iteration cycles. And it's like, you really need 500 emails. Right?
Well, can you say that again? I just lost.
You really need 500 emails to know if a given template is good. And so like, 10,000 contacts basically gives you like 20 split tests. You can test 20 messages across, which most of the time just comes down to the other thing with cold emails, it's not a very, I just don't like it. It's just not a very efficient way to test. It's not a very contact efficient way to test your messaging. Cause like, within like on the phone, within like 10 conversations, if your messaging is directionally accurate. And that takes like 50 contacts or 70 contacts to get to that. So the level of contact efficiency, the level of efficiency to validate a message, it's like 10 times. It's like 10 times more efficient
It's horrible.
to validate a message than normal templated. It's different if you go full personalized multi-channel cold email. That's different, but no one really wants to do that. And the learning curve is pretty damn high on that. So it's just harder to be repeatable. So
I would say, like, in summary for people on the cold email side is like, if you're a startup and you're still validating messaging, you probably should just go with the cold calling or even LinkedIn.
Or LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn posts are amazing. Like if you can find an active segment of your market that's active on LinkedIn, and you can start commenting on their comments until they start responding to you. Like I think that LinkedIn is another untapped medium. The hard part is you have to actually have something you need to say. And you have to understand something.
For some reason, the quality is degrading on your
I'm
mic.
sorry.
And it's getting pixelated. I'm not sure if there's anything.
It's probably I
think the local recording should solve for that.
okay.
I
Be
wasn't
aware.
sure if there's something
No,
you
that's
can do
good.
to change it.
I think that is another way to get the same semi real time high information bandwidth level of recording or level of conversation that you can get with calls. LinkedIn is a way to solve for that, but you have to know how to do social. That means you have to know how to
Mm-hmm.
post, have to know how to comment, you have to know to write profiles, you have to know how to DM. That's just a different set of skills. Some people are, you could train at, it's just a larger learn. And I think yeah.
So essentially, avoid cold email if you're an early stage startup without a product messaging fit or market messaging fit. I would also argue if, like we said, like debatably, whether it's on the very, 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 very low end, 10,000 contacts. I argue it's 50,000 accounts, which is probably closer to 100,000 contacts. It depends,
I would
right?
say
It just depends. I've seen,
30,000 contacts is like very common. 30,000 is
yeah,
like, yeah, that's good. Um,
yeah,
Offers make it easier as well, right? If you're not directly
right.
selling or pitching something, because then you're not burning your TAM as fast.
Right. And I think this is good for people to listen to is that I think you and I have a difference of opinion. I think you need a larger TAM. I think it's debatable. It's just for me, I also am in the same boat of like, it can work for 30,000 people TAMs. I'm not saying it cannot. The question is, it's all relative to the expectation
Sure.
because I have clients that are like, we need 40 meetings per week. And I'm like, okay, well, that's not going to happen on a 20,000 person
Yeah,
TAM,
no, totally.
you
I
know?
would agree with that. Like, and well, you have to back into you have, I really like calculating back this on like contact efficiency. And that's kind of like, okay, what are you trying to get? So, but yeah, I think that's fair. I, I, yeah, I don't, man, I don't like the 5% reply to meeting or 5% conversation to meeting. Like, if I look at that, I'm like, okay, something's wrong with your messaging or follow up. Like something's wrong with that. Like that's barely above the 3% in market. And what that tells me with your message is there's no objection handling in place. There's no objection handling or differentiation. When I look at that, I look at that, I think, okay, you can sustain that and you can kind of fuck up your way to getting consistent meetings at that level. But that tells me like, okay, someone has not thought through the differentiation here or the follow-ups here.
It's interesting you bring up the objection handling because when we see for a lot of, because I'm a revenue operator just like you, I'm, I actually, I think, I don't know if you do this, but I default to sending more volume to the sales team than less because a lot of people, especially at the marketing level, they're so obsessed with MQLs and certain quality
Yeah.
standards that they actually undersend. And for me, it's like, look, I would rather actually get an objection through to the sales rep and not say, oh, they're not good because the sales rep could potentially say, well, I'm interesting you say that we actually, and then overcome.
Yeah.
Same thing with like when you say, oh, we already have XYZ company that
Yeah.
do it. Well, there are three ways to band, right? They have budget, they have authority, they clearly have a
Yeah.
need, and maybe that's just not the right time because they already have something and you need to wait till the next buying cycle. But at least you can start the conversation, And so for me, I'm bullish in sending over like lukewarm leads on the cold email front because at least it gives you some fighting chance. If you just completely just take that out of the sales rep's hand, it's just like you end up with peanuts left.
Yeah.
Um, so the last thing I'll add here is so we've covered startups probably should avoid, small TAMs probably should avoid, and then also I would say small AOVs, right? We've talked about this before, but like if your AOV is small, less than
You can
say,
use that as a marketing channel. I do have to jump in a minute, but you can use that as a marketing channel. But like I know of a few people that have gotten that working at like 3 to 5K ACV, but you just have to have a locked in conversion process.
hmm,
And that's not necessarily the best way to do it.
can you say more about locked in conversion process?
You like at 3 to 5K ACV, you basically need to build one call close, maybe two.
Hmm.
You can't do that, and you can't, and that's just like you have to do a lot of education on someone at that process to get that to work. And a lot of people aren't ready to do that.
That's a good point. Is that like we said earlier, the post lead capture, meaning after they've come in as an interested lead, if that is extremely smooth, like there's very low friction and it's high conversion. Let's say you've like some crazy 70% close rate and like everybody shows up because the market's hot, and your cost to acquire is like 2K, but your AOV is 5K and your LTV is 20K. Okay, maybe. But that's a very specialized situation. So I would say that everything we're saying to guys listening, like just do your math, like get
Yeah.
out a spreadsheet, capture the data, see how many meetings are showing. Like if you don't have this set up or dashboarding set up, you really need that because otherwise you're just guessing.
And it doesn't have to be
So
perfect. It doesn't need to be crazy automated. Just throw in a freaking spreadsheet and look at your conversion rates and get someone to look at it. It's not that hard.
yeah, exactly. So I feel like we just went on a journey. I feel like
Yeah.
this has been good. So I know that with we've been on for an hour 40. What's a final thing? If you had to leave, this is a good question. If you had to leave planet Earth with one final little snippet about, what you think is most important right now. I know that's how we started the conversation. What's a final little piece of knowledge or wisdom you would add? It doesn't have to be about startups, by the way. It could be about spirituality for all I care. I'm just curious, like,
Well,
what do you think you'd
I
want to leave people with?
and it's funny you say that because we didn't talk about spirituality at all. Like I didn't. Uh, 17 years ago, I wanted to be a Navy SEAL.
Me too.
Okay.
There
Yeah, and after a couple of years, I got into missions work, um, and I really just started becoming enamored of the idea of the kingdom of God. That okay, God actually cares about people here on Earth today, and He wants to serve people. And like I went on a whole journey with nonprofits and ministry of homeless, and what I realized is like a lot of nonprofits are actually parasitic in nature, past immediately relief efforts. They don't create development. The nonprofits that create the most long-term sustainable impact are basically business incubators. So I started realizing like actually business is one of the most sustainable vehicles to serve people. And so I really kind of came down to like, hey, I actually want to serve people through business. And I think the big thing I would just tell people is like, my number one piece of advice is just like, God loves you and He wants to help you and give you a good life. And He's put a lot of unique talents and passions and gifts. And you just pray about it enough, all of this comes together. It's taken me, I feel like I'm just coming to my own 34 years into my life. And I'm fine. And a lot of things are in my life are hitting their stride. It took a very long time, but a lot of that came through just praying a lot, being like, God, how do you want me to approach this? How do you think about this? How do you see me? So my number one advice is like, pray about more stuff. God wants to help you. And He cares about you. So that would be, if I had to leave with one piece of advice, is like, God cares about you. He wants to help you pretty much everything. You should pray about more stuff. That would be my one final thought to leave with.
That's great. It's good timing that you decided to go in that direction, which is obviously interesting because we just went on this like very deep tactical, strategic, analytical deep dive of philosophy of GTM. But I'm also in the same headspace, which is like I just came back from the Costa Rican jungle. Like literally, I was on a plane 3 days ago, and I'm going to share this one quick story
Go
because
for
I
it.
think this ties into what you were saying. I like you, I went on a kind of a weird winding road, and I grew up in a family with my mom was a public school teacher, special needs teacher, and my dad was a federal prosecutor.
Really?
And I grew up in a household where nobody talked about business. My grandfather was the president of Technology Magazine back in the 60s, and he was super into business. But my dad had kind of pushed back against that.
Yeah.
So I grew up in a world where business wasn't even on my radar.
Yeah.
I went to school, was a political science and philosophy major, got out and worked at nonprofits and in politics, political campaigns at the local state level. My dream was to be the president.
Oh, yeah.
Like being in business was like not even a thing. So I spent, once I got the bug, I read the Lean Startup. So I came across in, I think Barnes and Noble's like a
Right.
blue binder, a little spine, and I pulled it out and I was like, oh, I'll read it. I wanted to be a better manager at the nonprofit I was working at. It was door to door nonprofits for PBS.
Okay.
And I and I put the book on my shelf and it sat there for 6 months. And finally I read it and it broke through all these beliefs about who I was and what I could be in
I
business,
love
which
that.
is like, you didn't need an engineering degree. You didn't need to have, some business background. You didn't have to know accounting or legal. If you had a good idea, you could talk to people and you could build a cool thing, you could be in business. And so that was like a big breakthrough for me, intellectually. So I went down this path of like what business do I want to start and where should I start it? And like, and I just kind of took my opportunities where they arise. And it happened to be in the oil field SaaS and oil field agency space, which is like so strange because I was working for a nonprofit environmental group called Clean Water Action. So I was actually like anti-fracking. Um,
That is a
it,
hilarious flip. Wow.
yeah. I was anti-fracking legislation in Pennsylvania in 2011, and then I ended up working at and partially owning one of the biggest oil field fracking publications in the world.
Huh.
And so it was very
Oh
like,
man.
what is going on, God, So, anyways, this is a long-winded story to say I have like my old way of doing it was to tightly control the
Yeah.
outcome and to just force the reality. And I found out just through a lot of just failure that doesn't always work.
Yeah.
And where I've ended up coming back to the Costa Rican jungle about 2 months ago, I went to a conference. Promise this won't last more than 60 seconds. I went to a conference and I met this guy where it was a longevity conference. I'm not sure if you know Brian Johnson, the Don't Die guy.
I think I've heard of him. The which guy?
So he's a guy who wants to like Brian Johnson.
Oh, that guy.
He's this
Yes,
guy who
yes.
owns.
That Brian.
So I went to his event. It's this guy who basically wants to live forever. His big idea is we don't have to die. So I go to this event just kind of like as a curiosity. My friend was going, and there was this guy on stage, and he was speaking. It was more about spirituality and about how our connection to ourselves and our emotions is actually a critical component of health.
Yeah.
I know that sounds kind of obvious, but I had this strong emotion to hug the guy. That's weird, but that's the emotion I had. And I was like, no, that's weird. I'm not going to do it. So I don't do anything. And then the guy basically bumps into me in the hallway out of like 5,000 people at the conference. And I'm like, okay, I got to give you a hug, man. And I read him a poem. He had us all right. And next to him, there was this guy named Michael Dash. And I'm like, oh, what's up, Michael? How's it going? Nice to meet you. And he's like, man, like after reading your poem and the fact you just like said all this stuff, you got to come down to Costa Rica for this thing.
Wow.
And I'm like, I can't come. I'm launching a couple products. So it's not going to work out. And so I leave and I go to another event in Idaho. I went to a video, how to write video ads event. And I'm there and there's another guy and I'm like kind of drawn to the guy, but kind of like not drawn. And I was like, I'm not going to talk to the guy. The guy literally grabs my arm as I'm walking out of the conference and he says, hey man, you look stressed. And I'm like, yeah, I am stressed. He's like, I don't get stressed anymore. And I'm like, why is that? And he's like, well, I read this one book 11 times and it changed my life 10 years ago. And it just changed the course of how I think about the world, which makes me not stressed. And I'm like, well, what's the book? I want this book. And he was like, it's called The Surrender
Oh,
Experiment
I love that book,
by,
actually.
by Michael Singer. And so I go home and I'm like, well, maybe that's the reason I went to that conference. So I read the book and the whole book for anyone who, not to like ruin the book for you, but this guy basically decides that he's going to just surrender to whatever the universe puts in front of him and just say yes, even if he internally is thinking no. And then that's what leads to all of these successes he has. He becomes a billionaire in the process. And he started out as a yogi who wanted to just live in the woods.
Oh,
So
before
for
that,
me, like,
he starts before that with his he was briefly married and his wife divorced, and then he just was like, "What the fuck am I doing with my life?" And then he became a yogi, and then he starts a software company.
right. It's just like this, like weird, strange turns of
Yeah.
events. So, but the moral is he didn't control; he just let it happen. So for me, like, I'm like, okay, well, and this guy calls me Michael Dash. And he's like, you got to come down to Costa Rica, and I'm just like, you know what? Like, all I've done my entire business career is just hold on tight and try to force the direction. And I was like, I'm gonna just let go, and I'm gonna sign up for this thing. So I fly down there. This is last week, and I fly down there, and I literally have videos of me going, I don't know why I'm here. I don't know why I'm like, I don't know what's
Right.
going on. I don't even know where I'm going. I'm just flying into the jungle. And I get there and I end up having like the most amazing counterintuitive breakthroughs in terms of the way I perceive myself, in terms of the way I relate to my sister and my mom. And then it led to this whole new opportunity for me to do a lot more of these retreats that I'm very interested in. And it's so anyway, it's like, it's just a long-winded way to say, to you're saying like pray to God, and I'm kind of saying the same thing, right?
Right.
Which is just like be open to the universe and surrender to the forces that are being put in front of you, because I think it's a lot more connected than it seems. And that seems like the last thing you would get from like an
Business goals.
analytical kind
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
GTM guy like us, you know?
Yeah. That's good.
So,
Cool, man. It's good chatting.
well, where can people find you? I want
LinkedIn.
to make sure that
LinkedIn. I have a Twitter, but I don't really post on it much. LinkedIn. I'm the only Scott Martinis in the world to my knowledge. So I'm easy to find. NIS.
got it. So Scott Martinez, Martinis.
Yes.
We will put the link to your LinkedIn profile in the show notes if you're on YouTube, and also on RSS.com or Spotify. Again, I appreciate you being here, Scott. It's been a fun conversation. I'm sure we'll do it again sometime. For everyone listening at home, thanks so much for being here as well. We're signing out the Next Gen Sales Leaders podcast, and I'll see you guys on the next episode.
Sounds good.
See ya.